Bonjour tout le monde. Hello and welcome to this session of the MISC Annual Conference, which focuses on knowledge economy in Canada. Je vais maintenant vous présenter notre modératrice, April Fong. April is Deputy Managing Editor of The Logic, Canada's leading business, tech, and innovation publication. April was previously BNN Bloomberg's senior digital producer, overseeing the editorial content of its digital platforms. She has also worked for Financial Post, as well as China Economic Review and Talk magazines in Shanghai. April holds a Master's of Arts in Chinese Politics and Diplomacy from Fudan University and a Bachelor of Journalism from Carleton University. We are grateful to have you here today, April. C'est à vous de jouer. Merci.
Thank you, Professor Bailon, for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so delighted to be moderating today's panel on the knowledge economy in Canada, what I think will be a very interesting and insightful discussion about innovation developments in our country. We'll hear from our panelists today about the most pressing issues in the knowledge economy as our country transitions in many ways. To name a few, the acceleration of digitization, the growing influence of big tech on many facets of our lives, and the shift from carbon economy to greener technologies. The implications on the economy and our personal lives are deep and far-reaching. We will need the right R&D, policies, and people to address the challenges that all of these shifts will bring. In the next hour or so, we'll be discussing the following questions. What has changed in the debate about the knowledge economy in the last 25 years? Where are we at today? And where are we going? Without further ado, I'd like to begin by introducing and thanking our panelists in advance who have joined us to lend their invaluable perspectives to this conversation. We'll start with brief remarks from each of them, and then we'll open up the floor in the second part of our event in what I think will be a very lively discussion. So we'll turn to Vas. Vas Bednar is the Executive Director of the Master of Public Policy program at McMaster University. She is a public policy entrepreneur working at the intersection of technology and public policy. She's an interdisciplinary wonk focused on ensuring that we have the regulatory structures we need to embrace the future of work and new ways of living. She has held leadership roles at Delphia, Airbnb, Queen's Park, the City of Toronto, and the University of Toronto. She currently writes a newsletter about Canadian startups and public policy called Rags to Riches, and was recently recognized as an outstanding alum with the McMaster Arch Award. Thanks for being with us today, Vas.
So I don't know if I'm going to touch on what's changed in terms of the policy agenda on the knowledge economy, but maybe I can open by speaking to areas that I end up being most interested in, which is, the relationship between policymakers, the role of the state and innovators, right? It's right now become characterized by catching up, regulatory entrepreneurship, disruptive delays. And because we're in what Azim Azhar calls the exponential age, we still have an opportunity to also redefine how policymakers are in dialogue with innovators, right? Fundamentally, I think our innovation economy and policymakers, they end up having a ton in common. They're problem solvers. But in being problem solvers, we kind of hurt the practice of policymaking because it's so anchored around the problem statement, right? Policymakers solve problems. But what policymakers need to do in a digital economy and to support the knowledge economy is to be more anticipatory, to spot those harms on the horizon, right? To have the right guardrails so that poor business behaviors or, that regulatory gray zone, to use 100 cliches, that we don't normalize behavior that we later want to curb or catch up with. Because I think what we're learning now, when you look at Canada's kind of big tech agenda, which, is situated somewhere in terms of the knowledge economy and IP and creating value, you can't have an innovation agenda or economy without that accountability agenda as well. So things I think about that I think are different now is how do we create those spaces for innovators to dialogue with policymakers in a way where it's not punitive and it's not about, exerting force or accountability or kind of curbing bad behaviors, but testing things out, playing around, right? We've seen a lot of promise with regulatory sandboxes in other jurisdictions. We use them mostly in a financial setting in Canada, but we could do more there. We could also change the relationship. So to participate in the regulatory sandbox with the Ontario Securities Commission, you have to apply. That directional arrow is kind of wrong to me, right? I think we should transform that aspect of the state and of policymaking to invite innovators to kind of experiment and kind of have that play space. And I think that will help us, create better technology innovation, better technology regulation, that can be incremental and kind of radical in its incrementalism. We have big agendas. We want to do big things. We want to tackle big, again, problems. And we think we only have so much time politically and with the legislative sessions we have. And that means that we overlook modest but meaningful policy interventions that can unlock opportunity for Canadian innovators in new and surprising ways. And April, you can come back to me during our dialogue if you want some examples of those, but I hope that situates us in an interesting way. And if it doesn't and we don't return to that, it's okay too.
Great, thanks so much, Vas. Some really interesting points about policymaking in the knowledge economy. We'll now turn to Taylor Owen. Taylor is the Beaverbrook Chair in Media Ethics and Communications, the founding director of the Center for Media Technology and Democracy, and an associate professor in the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University. He is the host of the Center of International Governance's Big Tech podcast, where he is also a senior fellow. He is the author of the books Disruptive Power, The Crisis of the State in the Digital Age, and the co-editor of the World Won't Wait, Why Canada Needs to Rethink Its Foreign Policies, and Journalism After Snowden, The Future of the Free Press in the Surveillance State. His forthcoming book with Emily Bell will be published by Yale University Press this year.
Hey, thanks so much. Look, I guess I'll say a couple of things that in some ways build on what Vas just said, I think, which is that there's two sides to how we engage as a society in the innovation economy or the knowledge economy. Sort of on one side, we incentivize certain industries and certain forms of business, private sector behavior through industrial policy and innovation policy. We create positive incentives for certain kind of economic activity over others. This incentivizes the growth of certain sectors. It incentivizes how certain sectors are allowed or not allowed to behave to grow in our economy, what things they invest in. But it's also deeply tied with our social and economic objectives as a country. It's not just a neutral thing. We incentivize certain kinds of industrial behavior because we think they are good for our society. That could be because we think it's good for job growth, but it also could be because we think that industry is something that will benefit us more broadly in terms of our society, right? So on the one side, we incentivize these industrial actors in the knowledge economy. But on the flip side of that is we create regulations and legal mechanisms in order to minimize their downside risks. So that's the entire regulatory infrastructure that we put in place to kind of counterbalance the fueling of these sectors. And that too is a set of choices. It's a set of political and economic choices on what we think those risks are and how we balance the trade-off between the things we have to do to minimize those risks and the harm that they might cause ultimately to society. And I think we're starting to see that side, some of those muscles being used again in the knowledge economy in Canada. And we can certainly talk about the ways in which the current government has engaged with various aspects of regulating the knowledge economy. And there's been some real hits and misses there that I think we can talk about. But last thing I'll say is that both sides of this, both the industrial policy and the regulatory side, have a tendency to be reactive in that they're dealing with the reality of the innovation economy or the knowledge economy from the past, where in reality, they're building the template for what's going to be incentivized in the future. And I think that's where we can look sort of most critically at where Canada has sort of been behind here. And if you look at the spaces that are really booming, and I know John will probably talk about the AI space, right? And like, what kind of AI infrastructure and companies and behavior are we incentivizing? And is it the right one? When you look at where some of these companies are going, and sort of Facebook announcing we're building a metaverse. Well, how are we talking about both incentivizing and regulating this whole new space of social interaction, economic interaction? And do we have a say in that, right? Look at the biotech space, where Canada has a lot of great scaling companies, but you also look at where some of the more sort of challenging, I would argue, the concerning aspects of the biotech space. And are we building that incentive and regulatory structure to engage with where that sector is going? And I just don't think we have enough of that forward-looking balancing happening, particularly in the knowledge economy. But I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to talk about any of this.
Great, thanks so much, Taylor. We'll now turn to Maxime St Pierre. With over 2 decades of experience in the digital industry, Maxime St Pierre has led major national and international projects in B2C, B2B, and e-commerce. His product and service vision in a connected world is focused on engaging users, executing multi-screen strategies, and effectively leveraging technology. He's passionate about building end-to-end systems that allow digital citizens to interact easily within the context of their daily lives. Since 2016, Maxime has been at the center of Radio-Canada's digital transformation, driving the evolution of the broadcaster's web and mobile platforms, including EC2TV, Radio-Canada.ca, Radio-Canada Audio, Mordu.ca, as well as RAD, the Olympic Games, and the Digital Election Results module.
Merci beaucoup, April. Donc, hello to every anglophone. Bonjour à tous les francophones. Je vais faire mon ouverture en français. Donc, moi, je ne suis pas un journaliste. Je dis souvent que je suis un technologue au service du journalisme et du divertissement. Donc, April faisait allusion à plusieurs plateformes que nous avons développées dans le cadre, oui, de notre transformation digitale à Radio-Canada. Il reste que ces éléments-là sont des éléments super intéressants pour justement, c'est des ingrédients clés qui s'approchent des concepts du knowledge economy parce que quand on regarde tout ça, ça nous prend un écosystème dans lequel on va avoir des expériences, mais aussi l'intelligence au niveau des données et évidemment de l'innovation. Puis, quand on regarde tout ce qu'on fait à Radio-Canada, on va publier des centaines de contenus à tous les jours. Donc, ça veut dire aussi des dizaines de milliers d'interactions avec les utilisateurs. Donc, bien évidemment, ça fait énormément de données, des volumes de données. Et avec les données, c'est des traces ou des signaux que l'on reçoit qui nous permettent de devenir meilleurs. Donc, quand on parle du concept du knowledge economy, c'est sûr et certain que pour nous, ce qui est important, c'est la confiance, la pertinence et bien évidemment l'écosystème technologique qui comprend aussi la collecte de données, mais aussi l'innovation qui est un élément fondateur pour s'assurer de pouvoir se réinventer puis défier le statu quo. Donc, est-ce que nous utilisons les données à Radio-Canada et à CBC? La réponse, c'est oui. Est-ce que c'est correct d'utiliser les données? La réponse aussi, c'est oui en quelque part, dans la mesure où il faut le faire avec dans le respect des utilisateurs. Donc, en toute transparence, en s'assurant aussi d'être en lien avec nos valeurs, puis s'assurer, bien entendu, d'appliquer la notion du consentement. Donc, c'est quelque chose qu'on fait déjà depuis plusieurs années. Il reste que quand on parle de ces questions-là, au niveau de l'utilisation des données, c'est sûr qu'on touche une corde sensible auprès des utilisateurs. Donc, on peut voir ce qui s'est fait avec Facebook, avec Cambridge Analytica. Donc, est-ce que la démocratie en tant que telle est à risque aussi? Donc, c'est tous des éléments qui font en sorte que quand on se questionne dans notre transformation numérique, c'est des questions qu'on se doit de poser pour vraiment s'assurer, encore une fois, de garder la confiance et garder aussi la pertinence de l'écosystème que nous allons développer. Donc, quand on regarde, on a fait plusieurs exemples qui touchent à ça, où on a mis des algorithmes en place pour aider nos contributeurs éditoriaux. On a aussi travaillé avec la voix de synthèse à Radio-Canada On a développé aussi des systèmes de recommandation de contenu, mais il reste que la clé, selon nous, c'est vraiment, encore une fois, de s'assurer de la pleine transparence. Donc, d'expliquer qu'est-ce qu'on va faire avec cette information-là pour s'assurer que les utilisateurs soient bien au courant de comment on va travailler avec les données. On dit souvent nous, on les appelle les citoyens numériques, donc ce n'est pas des clients pour Radio-Canada, c'est vraiment des citoyens. Donc, on veut s'assurer que de cette relation-là est bien présente. Puis, c'est au même titre que pour nos utilisateurs à l'interne. Donc, on veut devenir meilleur, on ne peut pas juste s'asseoir sur la structure qu'on avait en place. On doit toujours de se défier puis de voir un peu plus loin, de voir comment on peut se propulser plus loin, parce que c'est ça aussi, c'est de comment on arrive à faire évoluer les choses. Puis, dans un contexte comme ça, bien, il y a beaucoup d'historique à CBC Radio-Canada, il y a 80 ans d'historique. Donc, comment on arrive justement à se transformer dans tout ça, sachant très bien qu'on a énormément de défis en termes de la perception des algorithmes et de l'intelligence artificielle, aussi au niveau de l'embauche et de la rétention des talents. C'est un élément qui est extrêmement difficile aussi en même temps. Puis l'adoption de certaines technologies, que ce soit au niveau interne, mais au niveau public aussi, avec des politiques publiques. On peut penser aux tech giants, entre autres, qui n'ont pas les mêmes règles du jeu que pourrait avoir le diffuseur public. Quand on regarde tout ça, c'est sûr et certain que ça fait énormément de défis. Ça nous amène aussi à réfléchir aussi beaucoup plus loin, mais il reste que notre mission est toujours la même, c'est d'informer, éclairer et divertir, mais en ayant en tête que si on arrive à capter ces signaux-là au niveau des données, mais qu'est-ce que ça va donner un diffuseur public dans 5 ans, dans 10 ans, dans 20 ans? Puis, ça va être quoi la relation qu'on va avoir aussi avec la technologie, les données, et comment cette acceptation-là va se faire au niveau des auditoires. Donc, je vous dirais beaucoup de questions. Je pense que c'est sain de se poser des questions tant aussi longtemps que c'est en lien avec nos valeurs, mais il ne faut pas avoir peur non plus d'explorer. Puis j'espère que je vais avoir l'occasion d'échanger avec vous aujourd'hui sur ce sujet-là. Merci.
Thank you very much, Maxime. We'll now turn to John. John Stackhouse is a nationally best-selling author and one of Canada's leading voices on innovation and economic disruption. He is Senior Vice President in the Office of the CEO at Royal Bank of Canada, leading the organization's research and thought leadership on economic, technological, and social change. Previously, he was editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail and editor of Report on Business. He is a senior fellow at the C.D. Howe Institute and the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and sits on the boards of Queen's University, the Aga Khan Foundation of Canada, and the Literary Review of Canada. Thanks for being with us today, John.
Thanks, April, and thanks to my fellow panelists for some extraordinary remarks. I think I might be smart just to shut up right now and turn it open to questions, since so many good ideas have been provided. But let me try to add a few comments and maybe add to the conversation. April, I want to start first with your point about what's changed in the last 25 years. And then shift just very quickly to, I think, what will be our challenge for the next 25 years, which is climate and climate innovation. So a few thoughts on what's really changed over the last 25 years in innovation, and many of them are not in Canada's favor. So I'm going to cite those first and then speak to what may be in Canada's favor. So among the things that have changed in innovation that may not be in Canada's favor, one is it is much more data-driven. And while we're good with data as a country, we're small, so we don't have large pools of data to work with. Secondly, it's transnational. Innovation has never respected boundaries or borders. It really doesn't today. It's 24/7 and truly global in nature. And that's not always a Canadian instinct. Thirdly, innovation is more and more privately driven. While governments are doing a lot in innovation, a lot of what's happening in the planet is being driven by large private organizations, for better or for worse. That's just the reality of the world today, and I don't see any indication that that's changing anytime soon. And then lastly, more and more, and this is going to accelerate innovation, is actually machine-driven. Innovation has always been a people-driven activity. We're great researchers, we're curious as a species, but we're now augmenting and amplifying that curiosity with machine curiosity. We have machine learning, we also have machine curiosity. And while we're really good at that in this country, the acceleration of both artificial intelligence and quantum computing is growing at a pace that we as Canadians may not fully appreciate. And it's going to be a never-ending challenge for us to keep up with some of the other actors in the world who are investing a lot and getting exceptionally good at that. So those are challenges for a small country like Canada. But we also have a few things in our favor, which is that innovation, I think, increasingly is going to be, and this seizes on something Taylor was speaking to, is going to be principle-driven. We've not necessarily had global principles around innovation over the last quarter century. I suspect we will, even out of necessity, see more of that in the next quarter century. Secondly, it's going to be more people-oriented. We're going to have more machines, so I'm not contradicting myself here. I just think more focused as machines become better and better at things that we as people to those machines. It's not just the value that machines bring to us. Advantage Canada, we're really good at attracting people from around the world. We're really good at working together with diverse groups of people. Not perfect, but better than a lot of places. And that could be a strategic advantage. And that takes me to the third strength for Canada in the next quarter century of innovation, that is going to be more pluralistic. We have seen really homogenous innovation models over the last quarter century. They've been incredibly good in some ways, but that homogeneity has led to many of the challenges that the other panelists have spoken to. And a bit more of a pluralistic approach is going to, I think, be an advantage in the future. So how do we apply that to what I said I think is going to be our greatest challenge in the next quarter century, that being climate? And I like to think that Canada has a real opportunity to create a climate knowledge economy. And what do I mean by that? We often think of climate as being either a moral universe, we are bad actors as a species and therefore have to change as a species. True, we do. Or we think that this is a technology problem to be solved. If only we can create the Jetsons universe, it will all be good. Or if some people think if only we can move to Mars or appropriate another planet, it will all be good, even if we mess up this planet. Maybe it's a bit of both, but if we focus on the climate knowledge economy and what we can do as a collective, but also as individual actors, I think we're going to accelerate the path to net zero, and particularly for Canada, which has got a number of challenges on that path. We can become more of a global leader than a global follower. We can do that at the firm level. So how do firms across the economy, public and private, become better knowledge actors in the climate space? Too much of the conversation is about sort of that company in industry X needs to solve things before my organization takes care of it. There's an enormous competitive opportunity for every operation in the country, be it a family farm or a retail operation, to be part of that climate knowledge economy and position themselves more competitively globally. Same for governments. How do governments rethink themselves in the climate knowledge economy, not just to be policymakers, but they're a significant part of the economy. And then thirdly, us as individual actors, because the choices we make, whether it's our shopping, our consumption habits, our eating, or our travel, are clearly influential on the shape of climate. We all know that. But how do we develop knowledge systems that allow us to be better decision makers through each hour and through each day? I'll just wrap up by pointing to a report we put out last week called the $2 trillion Transition. Bit of alliteration there. But this is a study that RBC did of the Canadian economy and how over the next 30 years, we can get to net zero. Well, as you can tell from the title, it's going to cost us $2 trillion. Big, big number, more than any of us can count. But that's actually a very manageable number. It's $60 billion a year, roughly 2% of GDP. Big number still, but also something that we have the capacity to invest in. This isn't just in fact, this is not a tax and spend idea. This is an investment idea. We've all got savings in different capacities that we can invest into this climate knowledge economy. How do we then take that $2 trillion in every sector, from agriculture to real estate, to use the knowledge that we are developing as a collective, not just the technologies of electric vehicles or of smart homes, but the human capacity and the knowledge that really accelerates and amplifies the power of technology to get us to where we want to go. Markets aren't going to do this on their own. We're here today because of market failure. Governments can't do it on their own. We're here today because of government failure. So we need some new models to explore and develop this knowledge-based economy. And for that, we're going to need talent, we're going to need skills, we're going to need work habits, and we're frankly going to need a different playbook for how we organize capital, how we approach ideas, how we bring people together to problem solve from the public sector, private sector, all levels of government, all communities, Indigenous particularly, to not just see this as a risk, as a problem to solve, but as an opportunity that we can seize on.
Thank you, John. Some really interesting thoughts there on some of the big challenges that Canada faces in the knowledge economy against a global backdrop. And I want to thank everyone again for their introductory remarks. We'll now turn to the Q&A portion of our event. I don't think we can really get away with the discussion without mentioning the very great disruption that we're all still seeing unfold today, and that is the pandemic. So my first question to everyone today is, how has the pandemic affected innovation and R&D in Canada? Will it have a long-term impact, and how do we get back on track? Let's start with John. Do you have any thoughts on those questions?
It's a great question, April, and I fear we're allowing the pandemic to fade a bit without taking stock of what we have collectively learned. And I would suggest there's a few key things that we can take forward from the pandemic. One is our ability to move quickly with public action. It's been said many times, so I'm just repeating what's been said, that we made public decisions and governments certainly acted on them at a speed and with an efficacy that is often lacking in other areas. So let's, it wasn't perfect and we should improve on that, but let's actually take some inspiration from this. We don't need to go into spin cycles through years, which sometimes we have a habit of in this country. We can just get on with it. Secondly, the willingness to experiment, to test and learn was more evident in some of the pandemic response than we see in other areas. Kind of interesting that we're more comfortable with that, with literally a life and death situation, than we are with other areas that may not be as threatening, and yet we seem to be more cautious. I think we also, lastly, should maybe take a more critical look at some of our challenges on public-private cooperation and collaboration. The inability or sometimes reluctance in the country to say, you know what, there's a group over here or folks over there who actually can just do this. They're really good at it. Just let them do it. Get out of their way or find out what they need. That's really, I think, an innate part of the Canadian spirit. So we need to just embrace that and start to apply it to other challenges.
Maybe I could chase that for a second, because, one thing we saw in the pandemic is that, only the banks were able to provide benefits like CERB to people. Canada is one of few jurisdictions that didn't engage fintech companies on that. So as we look at innovators and disruptors and kind of who can engage, maybe that's something to think about going forward, who we call on or who we trust or who's at the table when we're making those decisions. And we need to move quickly and kind of be in an emergency context. And since I chased and interrupted, maybe I'll just say a couple more things. I think the pandemic forced us to really reconcile with our notions of productivity and our metrics of productivity and what it means to be physically at work and what it means to work and what it means to work, too much. And that invited more surveillance at work. So we know that low-wage service and retail workers have been subject to surveillance creep for quite some time, algorithmic management, the datafication of their jobs. But now that's spilling over to a white-collar context too, where the trade-off, it seems, or the benefit of being able to work from home or work flexibly is that your keystrokes may be tracked, or your webcam might turn on sometimes, or, you'll get a lot of emails from Microsoft Teams about how responsive you are online. And that's prompting some really important and long overdue conversations. When it comes to data and productivity, the pandemic also caused a lot of us to shop online. We basically made it a public policy for firms to go online, and then have done very little to support them in going from brick and mortar to that online e-commerce environment when it comes to recognizing whether some of the dynamics of the competition landscape online is sufficiently different, and whether people have the tools and guardrails related to privacy. And in ordering so much online, not only did we arguably prolong the pandemic by having essential workers put themselves at risk so that we could get those packages to our door and that contract workers could bring us things in their trucks, we also have done nothing to stop the quantification of that kind of factory work, right? We're fascinated by Amazon, and I think we're pretty familiar now with what's known as the pick rate, which is set by an algorithm that's using data. That's pretty innovative, but it pushes people to basically function almost as close to a robot as possible. It pushes them to the brink every hour. And Amazon's fighting that with data, with innovation, to redistribute the muscular skeletal workload that they have. Now, policymakers have tools, some tools at their disposal. We see draft legislation in California related to setting warehouse rates. These are the sorts of guardrails that we need to consider with those trade-offs that might arguably curb some productivity, might have some connections to a stock price, but protect workers while facilitating innovation and facilitating e-commerce. Two last things. I think the pandemic really emphasized for us that the kind of social infrastructure like childcare can be thought of as an economic policy as well. And Taylor mentioned genomics, which I think is really important for us to think about from a data perspective and a biometric perspective. But in terms of back to that question of this disruption, April, early on, we saw people couldn't go into the lab. There was a big disruption to experiments that people were running. And the physical infrastructure of lab space in Canada is very constrained. It's oversubscribed. And when we think about genomic innovations, you can't start a genomics company like in your parents' basement or garage because you need a lot of certain things, right? So there is a data element to it that's exciting and cool that I think Canada is well positioned to capitalize on. But then there's also just that physical infrastructure piece of where the lab space is, who has access, and how we get junior innovators linked up with people with academic expertise, as many campuses are doing, and focusing on commercialization. But again, that access is key. Thanks for letting me jump in there.
How about you, Maxime? How do you think that the pandemic has affected innovation and R&D in Canada?
Well, every disruption is an opportunity to innovate at some point. So you need to look at all the angles. So you can see the positive side of it, but you can also see where people have been struggling actually. And one thing that we see at Radio-Canada for the last year and a half is social interactions within the team. So we're a digital team. Everyone wants to work from home. I mean, we've seen no gap in productivity, but the fact that people needs to communicate in a different way than they were before, we see there a need for human interaction that we thought was not needed at some point. And even tech giants ask people to go back to the office and then stop their policies and changed it because, I mean, people like the way they do work today, but they feel like they need to exchange in person on some of these specific questions. And we have a lab and a design team at Radio-Canada, and when you look at this, these kind of people needs to work with Post-it, they need a whiteboard, and these kind of things in the situation of a pandemic. And I'm talking for Radio-Canada, but I'm pretty sure it's everyone. I mean, it's finding the balance between the two. And now we were at one point of the spectrum, and now we're looking at the other side of it, and it's probably the answer and the solution is probably in between, but we still need to figure out where exactly it is. So a big impact on human interaction, in my opinion, for sure. And this is something we're still trying to tackle today. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one with that challenge. But again, it's an opportunity to innovate. So if you want to know where we can go, I mean, you need to try. So we were saying that we build, we test, we measure, and we iterate. And so this is something that we need to look at also in terms of innovation and policies, in my opinion.
It's the great experiment of how we work, right? Of how we're learning to deal with hybrid models and, going from working all together collaboratively to being in individual silos and trying to come back together again. Taylor, what about you? How has the pandemic affected innovation and R&D in Canada? How do you think we'll get back on track?
I mean, look, I just want to, to build on something everyone has really said is that we've been, and you just ended on there, we've been through this just remarkable, almost historic social experiment. And the experiment, the character of this experiment, unlike previous ones, whether they be wars or previous pandemics, has been one in digitizing our society and a forced digitization of all sorts of social and political and economic interactions that certainly had elements of being digital before, but now have been moved almost entirely into this digital infrastructure. And that digital infrastructure is both a product of our industrial policy and our regulatory regimes, like I was framing those two. But also we need to learn from it and be reactive to what we've learned from this experiment. And I think that's how we come out of this ultimately in a more positive space, is by learning what went right and what we've learned. I mean, I spent a lot of time teaching, and I actually think a lot of the things we've learned about digital teaching is a positive. And I'd like to keep doing some of that in the future. And so there's all sorts of positives we've all learned through this experiment. But I think we also have to question both of the outcomes of this, some of the harms, but also who has benefited in this the most and what industries are really booming now should give us, I think, cause for reflection. Look at where the capital gains occurred. Well, largely by a very small number of companies whose market caps have almost doubled in the last year and a half, none of which are based in Canada. I mean, we could put Shopify in there and say we do have a Canadian player in that market cap increase, right? But largely it's been the benefit of already existing incumbent actors outside of our country. Is that good industrial innovation policy? I don't know. And Vas mentioned the kind of social control and monitoring space. Like, why is it that as soon as we become digital in all aspects of our lives, two sectors that boom are surveillance tech and education tech? There's a reason for that, because data could be collected. A lot of people might see benefit and be able to control the behavior of people who share their data with them, willingly or unwillingly. It's like, is that something we're comfortable with? The rise of that sector booming, right? So maybe there's some calibration in both of those that are going to be needed.
The next question I wanted to ask is, to what extent is focusing on the knowledge economy the key to helping Canada's overall economic recovery, the post-pandemic recovery, as so many have called it? John, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's a very interesting point in time and fascinating. I can't remember a period in economic history quite as interesting as this point. The inflationary pressures, the labor shortages we're seeing, the disruptions to global trade, all happening at a time when digital expansion, as the others were just saying, is growing probably faster than any of us appreciate. So we're seeing big shifts in economic activity. And yet hesitations or drags, if you will, in different parts of the physical economy. And what this may do, it may lead to breakages in certain areas, but it can also force innovation if we seize on this moment. When you have periods of labor scarcity, for instance, as we do now, that is an excellent moment to innovate, to think about not just the technologies, but the processes that allow us to do things more efficiently, but also more effectively. Use the machines for everything machines are good at, and ensure that people are developing the skills, aptitudes, and opportunities in how they work, wherever they work, to take advantage of those technologies.
Thank you. I'm going to turn our Q&A to some of the things that you've already talked about, which is data. That's a big topic, I think, today. So I'll ask Maxime this first. When it comes to online data, what do you think are the most urgent guiding principles or regulations that are needed in Canada today?
Well, I mentioned it in my opening remarks, but transparency for sure. So people, they are not aware of all the data that they share, and making sure. And I had a discussion with someone saying, should data be a public good at some point? Because in the end, I mean, every companies, every industry is doing whatever they want with your data. And then there's no clear regulation, even in the media industry. And I think a lot of people, I'm not doing the policies, but a lot of people are thinking about that today for the media industry. But I mean, as a whole, I mean, there's so many pools and volumes of data that transparency and consent is are key elements, even for when we look at what happened in the United States with the American election, for instance. So data is really powerful, and so we need to make sure that people are well educated regarding data, and they understand actually what they are sharing. So that's why I'm saying transparency is a key element for sure. Could it be more regulated? Yes, for sure, but to what extent? So I think it's always again balance between what's the playing ground we want to have in terms of innovation versus just be something that has a lot of policy attached to it, because one goes against the other, in my opinion. So balance is always difficult, but again, we have to go to both sides of the spectrum, usually as human beings, to understand where is the equilibrium. So this is in my opinion one of the main trust, relevance, and transparency are the key factors in terms of data policies.
Yeah, I can jump in there quickly. I mean, I Vas will have a lot more to say about how regulations can actually spur certain times of positive economic development too, and not just hinder it. So I don't think it's always sort of a mutually exclusive tension between the two. But I think data policy is a case where that's clearly the reality, and shows just how out of step Canada is from where a lot of other jurisdictions are going. I mean, we made one attempt at updating our data privacy laws in this country a year ago, and then just kind of let it float away. Yeah. And even that attempt was sort of out of step with where a lot of best practices were in the democratic world. And that was a year and a half ago. And so now we're sort of, are we starting from scratch on that again? I don't know. But the way we regulate data is going to play a huge role in all these things we're talking about right now, on what economic activity is even allowed in our country, what's incentivized, and ultimately what these sort of social and economic outcomes are going to be of that economic activity. So we're way behind.
And a lot of what we're calling innovation with respect to data, we're making it sound so fancy and so special, but it's really just, in service of better ads, better micro-targeting for some products, anticipating what a bank customer may want and anticipating those needs and delivering it. Not necessarily a bad thing. It can be really cool. It can be really nourishing, knowing what your audience is listening to or reading or subscribing to, and then tailoring that. And I know that's reinforcing of the e-commerce ecosystem that we want to keep building up and facilitating, but it can have downsides as well. And yeah, absolutely, to what Taylor said, I mean, from regs can come riches. I absolutely feel that way, but it's part of the conversation.
We will get to that.
Okay.
John, how about you? Do you think a data-driven approach is a threat or not? How do we, as a country, define our values on data versus harnessing the power of it?
Some points raised about data challenges, and as a country, we just seem to paralyze ourselves, appreciating how quickly both the rest of the world is going. but de facto how that takes us with them, because we have live and do. So either we kind of set, or at least try to shape our own destiny, or that will be set and shaped for us, which is how things are, how things look to be going. I think one of the, if I could maybe add an additional point, one of the lessons from the pandemic is both the opportunity and the challenges of biometric data. And how, I mean, Vas said that a lot of data really is just ad behavior. And that's really where a lot of innovation in the data space has come over the last quarter century. And certainly over the next many years, maybe the next quarter century, biometric data is going to be as powerful, if not more so, and as valuable, if not more so, than the optimization of content consumption and related ad behavior. That's kind of maxed out in terms of the economic opportunity. It's really greenfield in some ways on the biometric side. And we've seen in COVID, so what can we learn over our approaches, good and bad, over the last 18 months that allow us to work with our own physical data and biometric data in ways that are beneficial to us as individuals, that help public health as well as individual health, and maybe even lead to economic opportunities for the country. So as we get maybe deeper or back into the data conversation, Taylor, I'd hope that maybe we can come at it with a bit more of that perspective.
With biometric data, like, is there any developments in the regulatory space to, incentivize it, to shape its formation and the opportunity there?
We have a huge opportunity with the biometric fingerprint of voice. In terms of being anticipatory and having better regulation. Some of the research suggests that just from, the beautiful tenor of all our voices, a system can infer our gender, our age, our weight, our health status. And there are patents that Amazon has and Facebook too, to kind of serve you ads or help you purchase, chicken soup for that cold. And I think patents are an interesting vehicle, again, for policymakers to spot those harms on the horizon and sort of see where do companies, what are they skating towards, and what does our regulatory regime need to be skating towards. I think the pre-existing legislation, it might be California, it's related to biometric, it's related to voice and like smart TVs, so it's pretty limited. But you already see headphones, in the health space. We have a big problem in Canada where we have a lot of health tech, or lowercase h there, that doesn't fall under the regulations federally as being a health medical device. So you have headphones that are listening to you breathe and trying to infer your heart rate, and sharing information that way, or kind of other wearables. Again, sorry to jump in. I got excited because I heard like a keyword. The keyword woke me up, and then I wanted to say a few things about it.
I'm going to turn the next question to talent, because I think we can't really talk about the knowledge economy without talking about the people who are going to be powering the knowledge economy. So what's the challenge going to be like training workers with skills that are needed in the transition to net zero, as John spoke about the acceleration of digitization, the next stage is the knowledge economy? How will we get there with the right people? Taylor, I see you're unmuted, so I'm going to start with you, if that's okay.
I was going to say that one sounds right up John's alley to me. Look, I mean, yeah. John, why don't you go first here?
Yeah, we'll go with John first.
I was eager to hear what you said, Taylor. So let me maybe set the table, and you can take it from there. To use the cliche, innovation is a team sport, and the team requires a real diversity of skills. So when we look at the climate knowledge economy, the skills that we're going to need over the next quarter century range from really sophisticated data skills. We've been talking about machine learning, for instance. A lot of what we will see in the climate space already is AI driven. Canada has a terrific opportunity there. How do we create the right economic models so that our best talent, whether it's machine learning or data analytics, ends up in these really critical spaces that are arguably than say add on to solving the climate crisis. But as that is electrical engineers and chemical engineers, we're going to need masses of those. We're going to need a new generation of what are traditionally called trades, blue-collar workers in the climate knowledge economy, doing everything from maintaining your electric device and vehicles to retrofitting your homes. And when we talk about the billions that are going to be needed, or 2 trillion in total, going into essentially a giant retrofit of our economy, that's not going to happen without this kind of complete orchestra of skills that we have as a country, but we are actually not set up very well for the future because we have this kind of demographic crisis coming at us over the hill of a very rapidly aging society. And our only offset against that to date has been immigration. So terrific, let's keep at it. But let's not assume that just the way we've done things for decades is going to be naturally occurring for decades ahead. We've got to have a really sharp national skills strategy, especially around climate, to ensure that we've got the engineers, we've got the data analysts, we've got the trades, and that we have knowledgeable consumers that are making smart decisions.
What about you, Vas? What's a challenge going to be like for us to get the right people in the knowledge economy? How will we get there?
I'm so glad John mentioned trades. I think trades are this, fascinating case study of how we look ahead and kind of work backwards to amend the skills that we're endowing the workforce with, because we're already seeing kind of different programs related to better, energy efficient buildings and kind of more green buildings. And we need to have that training so that we can, meet associated goals in the future. One thing I worry about in terms of the future is with reskilling, with upskilling, with supporting people in these new jobs, we also want to make sure that the regulatory environment isn't onerous. So, big surprise coming for me because I am pro innovation and pro regulation, but I think with some of the trades and those jobs, there's a very high threshold in terms of training that does prevent workers from being agile and flexible in the economy that we're trying to present that's there for them. And, back to that original question of the disruption that we're muddling through right now with the pandemic, I mean, the knowledge worker is hyper privileged more so than ever before, right? They arguably have the most economic power. They can work for anyone from anywhere, allegedly, right? And our trades workers and our service workers and our retail workers do not have that flexibility and autonomy. So making sure that we're building up the floor related to those jobs, that we have the right guardrails, that we have the right protections for these workers, as well as reskilling programs that are appropriate in terms of length of time, recognized as a credential and not overly burdensome, not a scam, right? Not gouging them from a financial perspective, and that they're able to access the capital they might need to smooth that lifelong learning from our banks or fintech institutions, I think is really important too. I think we're kind of dazzled and we're kind of worried about losing talent. Canada's always been nervous about, if I can say that cliche, of brain drain. Maybe that's something we should have examined off the top. What's changed? What's different? How do we think and talk about it? But those are definitely some issues that come to my mind, and it's all related to keeping workers here, right? If the space of work is changing and we're redistributing our population, say a little bit around Canada, maybe smoothing the population in an interesting way, then we have to make sure that we have affordable housing for, again, all kinds of workers, that we're supporting cultural workers, that we're helping people start new businesses and restaurants so that we can build up new communities in Canada that aren't just hyper urban.
It strikes me that we're maybe this is a consequence of the pandemic as well, but
yeah,
this whole conversation is about remarkably heavy-handed government intervention in the shape of the economy and society. And I mean, that maybe is much more analogous to industrial policy of 40 or 50 years ago than a debate about innovation and industrial policy in any time since then. I mean, 20 years ago, we'd be talking about any levers on the economy hindering market growth and FDI. we would not be talking about how you re-educate entire society for a transformation in the economy and support those that are going to be left behind in it, and keep some businesses in or out of Canada, depending on whether we like the direction they're going in terms of how they're shaping our society. So, I mean, we're in a very different place in terms of how we're talking about government intervention here.
Maxime, how about you? Any thoughts on, the challenge that we have for the knowledge economy?
So every day is a challenge. So most of my time is regarding hiring new talent and making sure retention is as low as possible. To your point, Vas, asking people to stay in Canada is one of our biggest challenges, because we need highly skilled developers, AI developers, machine learning. I mean, and these kind of people, we need to sell them the mandate. So we need to tell them, you're going to work on the Olympic Games project, or you're going to work on federal elections project, or you're going to work on I don't know, detect deepfakes within our ecosystem. So when we face deepfakes elsewhere, we're able to find out exactly what's going on. So detect the codes that we need. So you'll do a difference as the public broadcaster. But that's why I'm saying it's an everyday challenge, because we're the public broadcaster, and many private sector, they offer jobs that are twice the salary. I mean, and people are leaving in the US. It's really difficult. But again, if we sell the mandate, and we do have innovative projects that makes the difference in their life, a lot of people are ready to get engaged and involved in these kind of projects. But we do have really smart people in Canada, but I really fear that people leave the country for sure. One thing that we did actually is to build our own academy, so we could even take younger people, younger developers that are just getting out of university, so we can accompany them, so they can at least evolve in within Radio Canada. But again, it's not something that for sure will make sure that they stay, but at least they are closer to what we're doing, trying to achieve as our mandate. But one other challenge we have is we mostly need people speaking in French for Radio Canada. So finding developers, I'm taking that example, but there are many others, finding developers that are also speaking in French. I mean, it limits a lot of the spectrum again on who we can hire. And when I talk to my colleague at CBC in Toronto, they do have similar issues, because I mean, it's just crazy how quickly you do an offer to someone, and the day after, that person already have 3-4 offers and they go elsewhere. So and going back to what we were saying, I mean, this is the industry and where we're going, and it's going so quickly. We won't have enough workforce for all the different industries. And we were talking earlier on the digital transformation and the pandemic. And what we've learned from the pandemic actually is that all industries that were not really ready for digital transformation were really struggling, actually. And the one that were ready just boomed. And those are the companies right now that are getting all the people so they can just grow even bigger. And this is where it's one of our biggest challenges today.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Maxime. I want to turn to some policy questions and something that's quite in the news at the moment. We're learning a lot about Facebook's inner workings and the limits of self-regulation in the last couple of weeks. So I wanted to ask you all, how do you think Canadian regulators should be watching this? Maybe I'll start with you, Taylor.
God, where to begin? It's fairly all-consuming at the moment. But look, I mean, you're right. It shows that there are some costs to leaving big parts of this sector unregulated and leaving it to certain market incentives to decide how, in this case, speech is going to be regulated in our society. I worry a bit, though, we're going to take slightly the wrong lesson, which is that we should be further leaning into our attempt at regulating the symptoms of this challenge, as opposed to looking at the root causes of it. And I think one of the most valuable things that this particular whistleblower has focused our attention on is the policy path, which is focusing clearly on that structure, on creating more accountability and transparency mechanisms of how the model of these companies themselves work. And it's really important because it gets us beyond just a question of Facebook and towards the nature of the incentives that currently exist within our digital ecosystem, which are based on persuasive or sort of pervasive collection of data and monetization of those data, and the essentially targeting of content to us to adjust our behavior. And if we're concerned that there are some negative symptoms of that very business model, then the solution is not to sort of play whack-a-mole with the bad content that is the result of it, but instead focus in on that core structural dynamic. And I hope that's where we go from this. But the temptation is going to be there to kind of increase and really lean into our attempt at sort of putting the genie back in the bottle in terms of the harmful speech. And I'm not sure that's possible.
My next question is, how's Canada faring in comparison to other countries in terms of adapting public policy as technology evolves rapidly? Which countries are doing it well, and which ones can we learn from? Vas, I'll start with you, if that's okay.
Sure. I make fun of Canada a lot, and I should curb that. I often, I remind us, like, we're a copy and paste country, right? We're rarely, if ever, a first mover. We're a little cautious. And in the digital space, sure, there can be a lot of benefits to that. You've seen our kind of tentative, cautious approach to mimic legislative interventions that we see in other jurisdictions. We've seen that on the privacy file. We've seen it with online harms, as Taylor was speaking to. We take our cues from the UK, Australia, sometimes some inspiration from the US, but other times not. So I would say in terms of how Canada's doing, well, I suppose we should be happy that these issues are on the agenda at all and kind of topping the agenda. I don't know, of the 10 commitments that this new wink on the new, but the new government will be introducing or committing to in the first 100 days. 3 of those are related to our online lives, and that's pretty like new. I think it's fundamentally good. Are there generational gaps that might have prevented this in the past? Are there capacity gaps? Perhaps. Our understanding of, again, back to that language of problems and challenges weren't as sophisticated. I do think that Canada is fundamentally unable to have courageous conversations related to competition and competition-related issues. Partially, this is Taylor's fault for telling me to go research this topic, but also because of how our country regulates and kind of how we're structured and kind of where the power levers are. I mean, we're talking about innovation, and our banking sector also, arguably inhibits all kinds of innovation from other actors, and also makes policy, right? The mortgage deferral policy was, to my understanding, made by banks, and there was no conversation with the public around whether or not people should be charged interest during deferring their mortgage when they're experiencing a massive job loss at an extremely stressful, scary time. We're joking, I think, about the pandemic now, but that's a huge word with a lot of very serious connotations and weight. So I'm rambling a little bit, but how's Canada doing? We're getting there. And I think our approach of not always bringing along the public with us, not always bringing along experts and the voices of civil society is starting to really hurt us and causing mistrust and anger. But it can be productive to put out a concept, right? Use those trial balloons in order to get reactions that are more precise. And we sort of saw that, I think, with online harms, with a discussion paper and kind of an opportunity, an invitation, however late. But hey, if you get invited to the party, even if it's the night before or day of, you can still go.
How about you, Maxime? Did you want to weigh in on how Canada is faring in comparison to other countries for public policy as technology evolves?
Well, in digital, when you look at California, you mentioned Australia, but Europe, also France, for instance, it seems like they have the courage also to challenge the big giants. This is looking. We've been looking at of course when GDPR was announced. I mean, and we were ready. But we're still waiting for the digital charter and all the details associated to that. So I'm taking a posture of waiting and seeing. But I mean, going back to what I was saying in my opening remarks, I mean, all the values and transparency related to that. At some point, we need to have those questions and look at what's hidden under the hood regarding those questions. And I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people thinking about it. But I would like to see when we will take position. But I'll let other people do their jobs on that. But for sure, and when we look at other countries, I mean, for sure it's coming. I mean, it's a topic that is in discussion everywhere else. So we should be there at some point. Is it taking time? Maybe not. So
yeah, but whether we can enforce what we're putting forward is also like the bigger question, right? We're going to totally forget the thinning trust between people and government that we have enacted, that we're dragging our heels, that we put forward privacy legislation. It doesn't go anywhere. When we posture and we say we're going to do these big things, and if we don't pull through, if we're not able to consistently enforce these various new regimes, then I think the state's going to lose a lot of legitimacy when it comes to making policy for digital actors. And if it comes at the expense of demonizing big tech because that's kind of popular or on vogue, and because that's captured the public imagination, then that's okay too. But we have digital first companies in our own backyard, and no one else is going to regulate them but us.
Very good point. I want to close with sort of a rapid fire round. I want you all to look into your crystal balls a little bit and look into the future of where the knowledge economy is going. So I'll start with John. My question to you is, to ensure the success of the knowledge economy, what is the most critical issue that policymakers need to keep an eye on for the future?
It's talent.
Maxime, how about you? To ensure the knowledge economy's success, what is the most critical issue that policymakers need to keep an eye on?
Well, I agree with John. Talent, the human beings, actually. So it's been like that since the beginning. It's we need people. We need people to make sure that the society evolves, and based on that, all the traces that we left over time in history are have been used for evolving as a society. So, and knowledge economies is kind of that also at the same time. So, but when we look at digital and digital transformation and disruption, I think the notion also of perception and acceptation of all the different new things that we will see in the near future. We mentioned AI, but I mean, there's a lot of it can be scary, but we need to be able to be comfortable enough to play with these technologies and make sure also we have a playing ground where there's room for trials and error within, again, and respect our values and make sure we don't cross ethical questions related to that. And I mean, we need to accept that we're beta testers actually for the next generations. So we need to look at it that way and see where are the limits. But I mean, in 10 years, 20 years from now, where the metaverse will be, is Alexa the path for immortality, for instance, or some these kind of questions we don't see today the impacts of all these new technologies, but at some point, this is where we're going to be. So going back to policies, we need to make sure that it's open enough so we can explore that, but it's not all-you-can-eat buffet where everyone can just take what they want without any consequences.
Thank you. And Taylor, how about you? What do you think is the most critical issue that policymakers need to keep an eye on for the future?
Look, I don't think we know exactly how these different technologies and different companies are going to evolve. We may know sort of directionally where some of them want to evolve. But we are not only subject to what they want to build. The metaverse is a great example. It is not just a company's decision on whether we shift our society into a digital virtual world. That is also our decision. And it's a decision we can in some ways shape, not entirely, but in some ways, based on what kind of economic activity we incentivize through our innovation and industrial policy, and what sort of regulatory and legal frameworks we put in place to minimize some of the harms we might see coming from these sorts of technologies. And I think that's the case across the digital space. And we're just starting to look, I think, more creatively at that balance. And the one thing I would just add to that is that we are not alone here. Democratic countries around the world are experimenting in what is ultimately a really complicated policy domain here. We're talking about reshaping our economy and building new rules for an entire new way society is structured and a whole new set of technologies. But we do have to learn from other countries too. And so that's, I really think when you think of the governance side of this, we need to look at experiments that have happened in other jurisdictions and other countries and aspects of this and learn from it to develop our own. And I hope we do that with more iteration than we have to date.
Vas, we'll end with you. What's the most critical issue that policymakers need to keep an eye on?
I'm cheating. I'm going to pick two. The first, keep an eye on childcare. Think about investing in small startup families the way we're willing to take risks and invest in businesses. We have to de-risk that period of people's life so they can take risks and be productive and continue their career journey. It's really, really important. And the second thing is keeping an eye on the regulatory environments and building environments related to broadband, which I think is on John's agenda because you had kind of a bad connection. I'm just kidding. But, in this digital society, as we want to ensure people's full participation, access to opportunities, access to learning opportunities, it's not just working from home. It's not just working online, right? It's living online in this digital society. And if we don't make sure we're doing more to, connect everyone in an affordable, consistent way as fast as possible, then way too many Canadians are going to be missing out on all those exciting innovation-related opportunities. Maybe it's just them starting up a little Shopify store or something on Etsy, or meeting someone new online and talking about ideas or discovering their ideas. But we can't move fast enough on that for Canadians. And even though we hear the high proportion of people that already are connected, we have to think and worry about the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1% until it's zero.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to Vas, Taylor, Maxime, and John for being here with us today and sharing your insights. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this really interesting and insightful conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And on behalf of MISC, we hope that everyone watching enjoys the rest of the conference. Thank you and all the best.